Imagine your favorite food suddenly disappearing from your plate, replaced by unfamiliar processed alternatives. How would this affect your health? How would this affect your identity? This is the reality faced by many Native American communities. But under the banner of food sovereignty, there are ongoing struggles to reclaim native foodways. And so in this video, we'll explore the ways in which indigenous food systems were targeted for destruction and how they're now being rebuilt. Many of us are already familiar with the story of colonization, how the westward expansion of the United States was predicated on the devastation of the indigenous population, and how through a combination of disease, warfare, displacement, and forced labor, between 80 and 98% of the native population was killed. But one component of this horror that's often overlooked was the way in which colonization of the indigenous food system played a key role in that strategy. Indeed, the U.S. government employed a variety of strategies aimed at undermining native food supplies as a means of subjugating and displacing native communities. One of the most well-known was the destruction of the bison herds on the Great Plains. Bison were a critical food source and a cultural resource for many Plains tribes. Indeed, buffalo played a central role in creation stories and occupied an important spiritual place among many tribes, in addition to being a critical resource providing everything from food to shelter in the form of leather to make teepee covers, to clothing, to eating utensils, shield, weapons, and even thread for sewing. Recognizing the importance of the buffalo herds, Colonel Richard Dodge said in 1867 that every buffalo dead is an Indian gone. Secretary of the Interior Columbus Delano wrote in his 1872 annual report that the rapid disappearance of game from the former hunting grounds must operate largely in favor of our efforts to confine Indians to smaller areas and to compel them to abandon their nomadic customs. In pursuit of this strategy, the government actively promoted the extermination of the wild buffalo. In the mid-1800s, there were an estimated 30 to 60 million buffalo on the Great Plains. By 1893, there were fewer than 400 wild buffalo left, and the Plains Indians were pushed off the land as well. Crow Chief Plenty Coups described the impact of the elimination of wild buffalo on the mood of his people, saying that, when the buffalo went away, the hearts of my people fell to the ground. After this, nothing happened. There was little singing anywhere. But while the elimination of the wild buffalo from the Great Plains is the most well-known such example, it was hardly the only or even the first. In 1863, the U.S. military launched a similar campaign against the Dene Navajo people, destroying sheep herds that were central to their livelihoods. The Dene lived in the southwestern United States, modern-day Arizona, and sheep were central to their lives, providing food, clothing, and trade goods. But in an effort to force the Navajo to relocate to designated reservations, Colonel Kit Carson launched a scorched earth attack, destroying Navajo crops, homes, and livestock, especially their sheep, which were specifically targeted because of their central role in the Navajo economy and way of life. Thousands of sheep were slaughtered or driven off, devastating the Navajo food supply and economic foundation of their way of life. Ultimately, the Navajo were forced to surrender, and 8,000 of them were forced on the Long Walk, a 300-mile march to a reservation in New Mexico. Military campaigns frequently targeted crops and food stores as well, all in an effort to deprive native communities of sustenance, particularly during harsh winters, and making them more susceptible to starvation and disease. Notable examples of this include the bison and sheep we just discussed, but also General Philip Sheridan's scorched earth tactics during the Red River War of 1874-75, which targeted Comanche, Kiowa, and other tribes and sought to cut off food supplies to force tribes into submission and forced relocation. The removal of tribes from their ancestral lands disrupted traditional agricultural practices and access to established food sources. Relocation to less fertile areas or reservations with inadequate resources made it difficult for communities to maintain their food security and self-sufficiency, and traditional foods were often not suited for cultivation on new reservation lands. The Dawes Act of 1887, which aimed to assimilate Native Americans into settler society by allocating individual parcels of land to Native families and selling the surplus land to non-Native settlers, led to the breakup of traditional tribal lands and the loss of communal food production systems. This further disrupted traditional foodways, cutting off tribes from traditional hunting and fishing grounds and contributing to food insecurity. At the same time, the introduction of non-native species, including cattle and invasive plants, competed with native species and disrupted delicate ecosystems, altering traditional hunting and gathering practices and contributing to the decline of indigenous food sources. In this context, many tribal communities were forced to depend on government rations, but such rations were often inadequate in quantity and quality, and they were often bulk commodities that were not culturally appropriate to the communities to which they were sent. To cite but one example, cheese and dairy constituted a key part of rations provided to tribes, despite the fact that more than 3/4 of all Native Americans were lactose intolerant. Such ration programs thus reinforced malnutrition and fueled the rise of diet-related diseases among tribal members that remain alarmingly high. Even today, Native Americans are 2.5 times more likely to be diagnosed with diabetes than whites and suffer from obesity, cardiovascular disease, and hypertension at rates 20 to 25% higher than the U.S. population as a whole. The deliberate destruction of food sources was not only a means of physical destruction, but also aimed to eradicate cultural practices and weaken social structures. Food is a central aspect of cultural identity and community cohesion. And in destroying their food, the government arguably aimed to destroy Native Americans as well. Sean Sherman, a Lakota Oglala Sioux who goes by the moniker the Sioux Chef, describes the cumulative effects of U.S. government policies in the 1800s on indigenous food traditions, observing that the most effective way to conquer a people is to attack their food systems, burning crops, destroying food storage systems, destroying bison, letting cattle graze on ancient fields. He said, "If you can control the food, you can control the people. It's a war tactic." This is also one of the main reasons why Native American foods have such limited reach in the United States today. Sherman humorously addresses this phenomenon, describing his effort to find an Indian restaurant in his excellent TED Talk, which I'll link to in the comments section below. Sherman jokes about not knowing how to classify the kind of food his restaurant serves. Is it New American, Old American, is it Indian? He astutely observes that any major American city will have dozens of different restaurants serving nearly every type of global cuisine: French, Italian, Thai, Chinese, Japanese, Ethiopian, Mexican, and so on. But you'd be hard-pressed to find a restaurant serving Native American cuisine anywhere, despite the fact that we're living on native land, in landscapes perfectly suited to grow the food that Native Americans ate for generations before contact. Overcoming this historical erasure and rekindling indigenous food transitions is a key component of contemporary native food sovereignty, breaking away from the commodity foods provided in food assistance packages and embracing traditional foods. Chef Sherman's Minneapolis-based restaurant, Owamni, showcases modern indigenous foods with a variety of seasonal menus, using only pre-colonial ingredients native to North America and serving them with a modern twist. Dishes like grilled sweet potatoes with maple chili crisp and native wild rice with lobster and ground cherries embrace the diversity of traditional foodways. But it's more than just promoting indigenous foods for their own sake. Traditional diets are often richer in nutrients compared to contemporary diets high in processed foods. Returning to traditional foods can help address issues like diabetes, obesity, and health disease that are prevalent in many native communities. At the same time, traditional food practices promote physical, mental, and spiritual health by reconnecting individuals with their environment and community. Traditional foods are deeply intertwined with cultural practices, ceremonies, and storytelling. By reintroducing and cultivating these foods, Native communities revitalize cultural heritage and traditional ecological knowledge, strengthen cultural identity, and foster intergenerational connections, helping preserve language, rituals, and a sense of belonging to the land. Traditional food systems often emphasize sustainable practices that respect and nurture the environment. By revitalizing these practices, such as rotating crops, using natural fertilizers, and protecting native species, Native communities contribute to ecological restoration, conserve biological diversity, and mitigate the impacts of climate change. Rekindling traditional foods also provides a platform for education and advocacy. By sharing knowledge about traditional diets and their benefits, Native communities raise awareness about food sovereignty, advocate for policy changes that support indigenous food systems, and challenge harmful stereotypes about Native American cultures. Ultimately, rekindling traditional foods empowers Native communities to take control of their food systems from production to consumption. This includes reclaiming land access, promoting sustainable agriculture, and establishing community-based initiatives like gardens, farmers markets, and seed banks. As such, food sovereignty strengthens tribal self-determination and reduces dependence on external food sources. And there's an economic benefit as well. By cultivating and selling traditional foods, developing food-based businesses, and promoting cultural tourism centered around food, communities can create jobs, support local economies, and build resilience in the face of economic challenges. There are some great examples of food revitalization initiatives by tribes across the United States. The White Earth Land Recovery Project was founded in 1989 by Winona LaDuke on the White Earth Ojibwe Reservation in Minnesota. It aims to revive traditional food practices with a significant emphasis on protecting and cultivating wild rice, which holds cultural and spiritual importance for the Ojibwe people. The project also promotes sustainable land use, organic farming, and environmental stewardship, empowering the community to achieve greater food sovereignty and economic self-sufficiency. Through education, advocacy, and hands-on initiatives, the project works to preserve Ojibwe heritage and foster resilience in the face of modern challenges. The Sikanju Food Sovereignty Initiative on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota is dedicated to revitalizing traditional food systems and enhancing food security for the Sikangu Lakota community. By promoting local food production, sustainable agricultural practices, and education on traditional diets, the initiative aims to restore cultural practices and improve health outcomes. It supports the development of community gardens, greenhouses, and farmers markets, fostering economic self-sufficiency and resilience. Through these efforts, the initiative empowers the community to reclaim control over their food sources, preserve their cultural heritage, and build a healthier future. The First Nations Development Institute is a nonprofit organization dedicated to strengthening Native American communities by providing financial support, technical assistance, and advocacy for initiatives that promote economic development and food sovereignty. It funds grassroots projects that restore traditional food practices, enhance food security, and foster sustainable agricultural practices. By empowering Native communities to build their own food systems and economic infrastructures, the Institute helps preserve cultural heritage, improve health outcomes, and achieve greater self-sufficiency. Additionally, it works to influence policies that benefit Indigenous food sovereignty and community well-being across the United States. The North American Traditional Indigenous Food Systems is a nonprofit organization founded by the Sioux chef Sean Sherman and dedicated to revitalizing Indigenous foodways and addressing the economic and health disparities faced by Native communities. Natives works to reestablish Native food systems through education, culinary training, and the development of food-related enterprises. They operate the Indigenous Food Lab in Minneapolis, a professional kitchen and training center focused on researching, gathering, cultivating, and preparing Indigenous foods. By promoting a new North American food system grounded in Indigenous knowledge and traditions, Natives aims to generate wealth and improve health in Native communities. And closer to home, the Rue d'Alagour Food Sovereignty Lab and Traditional Ecological Knowledges Institute is a pioneering initiative dedicated to enhancing food sovereignty and preserving traditional ecological knowledge among Indigenous communities in and around Humboldt County. The lab provides a collaborative space for research, education, and the practice of sustainable agriculture rooted in Indigenous traditions. It focuses on the integration of traditional ecological knowledge with contemporary scientific approaches to foster resilience, sustainability, and cultural preservation. There are lots of other examples of this kind of work currently underway. But that's it for now. As always, please leave any questions you have in the comments section below, and thanks for watching.